worked with Z company, and then one day he received a salary today. Then the following day, it didn't turn up. Then 6 months down the line, ABC company writes to XYZ that, oh, do you know Mr. Anonymous? Mr. Anonymous says he worked with you for 2-3 years. I don't know. Can we get his reference? In the circumstance, or generally, is employer obliged to give former employee work reference?
Thank you, Leonard. Yes. The way I will approach the question, you give a specific example. That specific example, I will readily answer yes. A prospective employer is already asking you for a reference.
Yes.
And we all know that when a prospective employer asks for a reference, it usually will have an effect on the employment being offered to the employee. So likely, a refusal to give that reference or a dishonest or inaccurate reference might affect the chances of that employee securing that employment. So clearly, there's an obligation to give reference in that instance. But generally, a lot of decisions of NIC will say there is no general obligation to give reference. But when you do give reference, it should be accurate and fair. However, there are decisions like the Umemuo case and Fidelity Bank that will appear to take that position clearly that there is now an obligation. Because if you look at what is happening around the world, we want to bring international best practices into play. We understand that globally, employers are required to give work reference in most of the instances. If you talk about Nigeria, like in some of the cases, like the Umemuo case that involve Fidelity Bank, in the banking sector, where you fail to give reference, it will definitely affect the employee's chances of securing the future employment that is being offered to him. And where such refusal to give reference leads to a denial of that employment, the former employer will be exposed to payment of damages if the matter were to be taken to NIC. Then there is also other sectors. I've had experience of a law firm. A lawyer left a law firm and moved to another law firm, and that law firm required a reference. And when that reference came, it discloses some misconduct on the part of the lawyer who was looking for a job in the other law firm. And on that basis, that person was denied that employment. So I want to agree that the general trend would be, particularly on request, when an employee has requested a reference, that the employer will have an obligation to give that. I mean, when a prospective employer have requested a reference from a former employer, there will be an obligation to provide it. And the reason is because it will affect the chances of the employee in seeking future employment, and also because there is an obligation under the law to give an honest, accurate reference of the person's work behavior while he was in your employment.
Number one, box, Michael has asked that those reference needs to be positive. So you'll be addressing that. But in addition to that, let me go back to the Kelvin Nwangwe's case that you referred to. Indeed, the position, like Riley stated, it will depend on, there was no general obligation. No general obligation. It will depend on the contract of parties. And the employment be a species of a contract. One would have expected that if it was that important, it would have been reduced, or it ought to be reduced into the contract of employment, or in addition, the workplace handbook. I mean, one of those two things can be looked into. So the way is not included. The takeaway from one way is that there is now an implied obligation that must be, and I don't think that is stretching it. That if it was that fundamental, shouldn't it be the contract that will speak to it, as opposed to introducing that or stretching that to be an implied term of an employment contract? Do you agree that that might probably be overstretching it? I mean, it was a fundamental term. It should be expressed. Did you agree?
I want to agree with the position that it should be an implied term. And maybe that is me being a pro-employee, even though oftentimes I find myself defending the employers. Yeah. But people do not require work reference just for fun. Yes. So the same way, because the old position was that you are not obligated to give this reference, but when you do give it, make sure it is fair and accurate. Yes. But in the present world of work today, prospective employers request for reference because they want to get an idea from the former employer about certain things about that employer. It is this reference that gives either a positive background or provide the kind of assurance that a prospective employer needs in order to conclude an employment contract. And I can't remember exactly, but I've come across literature that talks about where a prospective employer gets has failed to disclose in full what you ought to have disclosed in this reference, and it misleads a prospective employer. On the other hand, in Nigeria, we've had to deal with cases where the employer, in giving this reference, makes reference to issues that the employee was not even aware of. There were, maybe you have some kind of issues with that employee, which you never brought to the attention of the employee. Maybe there were some investigations that were being carried out, which was never escalated and the employee was not aware. Maybe there were issues, things you believe the employee didn't do right. He was in your employment, but these issues were never brought to give you an opportunity to respond. And when a reference was requested, you mentioned these issues in the reference. The court have held that it is an unfair reference. So if you look at the importance and the role that these references do play in the life of an employee who is seeking employment elsewhere, I think I agree with the decision in Wigwe that it should be an implied term of the contract.
Okay,